History books claim the 14th century was ruled by mortal kings, but hidden in the shadowed valleys of the north, it was ruled by beasts. What happens when a disgraced 19-year-old girl is thrown to the most bloodthirsty Lycan monarch in existence? She doesn't just survive, she reigns. The year was 1347. Deep within the territorial boundaries of the Ashwood Enclave, a secluded stretch of primordial forest, tucked away in the perilous high moorlands, the winter was unforgiving. But for 19-year-old Alice, the biting frost of the wind was nothing compared to the ice in her father's eyes. In the medieval lycanthrope society, a wolf's worth was measured by two things: the strength of their shift and the appearance of their mate mark. Alice had neither. She stood shivering in the center of the great hall, her thin linen dress offering no protection against the draughty stone walls. It was the ceremony of the 19th winter, the absolute deadline for a Lycan to present their destined mate or face the judgment of the pack. The moon priestess matron Agatha grabbed Alice's wrists, turning her forearms under the flickering torchlight. The skin was flawless, pale, blank. A collective murmur rippled through the hundreds of pack members gathered in the hall. To be a late bloomer was an embarrassment. To be mateless at 19 was a curse. It meant the moon goddess had found the vessel lacking. Nothing, matron Agatha announced, dropping Alice's hands as if she were diseased. She is hollow. The wolf slumbers and the goddess turns her face away. Alice looked desperately toward the dais where her father, Alpha Corin, sat. Next to him was her stepmother, Lady Vivian, wearing a smirk disguised as a sympathetic pout. Beside them stood Alice's younger half-sister, Gwendolen, who was proudly displaying the freshly scarred mate mark on her neck, entirely wrapped in the arms of Caelan, the pack's most celebrated young warrior. "Father, please," Alice whispered the words catching in her throat. "I can still serve the pack. I can tend the pups. I can work the apothecaries." "Silence." Corin's voice boomed, echoing against the vaulted ceilings. He stood, his massive frame casting a terrifying shadow. A mateless wolf is a broken link in the chain of our survival. You draw weakness to our borders, Alice. And in these times, weakness is death. The Ashwood Enclave was starving. A brutal famine had swept through their lands, and worse, the threat of invasion from the feral rogue packs to the east loomed over them. They needed an alliance. They needed gold. Heavy wooden doors groaned open at the far end of the hall. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, falling utterly silent as a towering figure strode into the room. It was Lord Gideon, the emissary of the northern steppes. He wore thick furs dusted with snow and a chestplate of blackened steel. He did not bow to Alpha Corin. He didn't have to. Gideon served King Valerius of the Iron Ridge. Across the continent, the name Valerius was whispered to frighten unruly children. He was the Mad Lycan King. At 26, he was said to be a monstrous brute who had lost his mind to the savagery of his inner beast. He ruled his vast, wealthy dominion with an iron, blood-soaked fist. The rumors claimed he chained himself to his own throne during the full moon to keep from slaughtering his court. The most horrifying rumor, however, was about his brides. 3 times the king had demanded a sacrificial bride from the lesser packs to appease his volatile wolf. 3 times those girls had vanished behind the walls of his fortress, Duncragan never to be seen again. Alpha Corin. Gideon's voice was like grinding stones. "My king's patience wears thin. We brought the silver. We brought the grain. Where is the tribute?" Corin didn't hesitate. He raised a hand and pointed directly at his eldest disgraced daughter. "There. The girl is yours." Alice felt the breath knocked from her lungs. "No!" she gasped, stepping backward. "Father, he's a murderer." You're sending me to my death." "I am sending you to serve your pack," Corin replied coldly. "You have no mate to claim you. You have no wolf to protect you. You will do your duty, or you will be stripped of the Ashwood name and hunted as a rogue." Before Alice could run, 2 of her father's guards seized her arms. She kicked and thrashed her screams, echoing off the stone, but she was a weak, unshifted girl against seasoned Lycan warriors. Lady Vivian stepped forward, producing a pair of heavy iron shackles. Not silver would burn a wolf, but cold iron used for prisoners. "Consider it an honor, sweet Alice," Vivian whispered maliciously as she locked the cuffs around Alice's wrists. "You are buying us a future with your worthless life." For exactly 500 gold pieces, 100 wagons of grain, and a signed treaty of protection, Alice was sold. She was dragged out into the freezing night, thrown into a reinforced steel carriage bearing the crest of the Mad King, a snarling wolf skull pierced by a crown. As the heavy doors slammed shut, sealing her in darkness, Alice wept. She was a banished outcast, a sacrificial lamb heading straight into the maw of the most dangerous predator in the known world. She had no idea that her dormant wolf wasn't dead at all. It was merely waiting for a king worthy enough to wake it. The journey to Duncraggan took 3 agonizing weeks. The carriage violently rattled across the treacherous passes of the Black Mountains. Alice sat huddled in a corner, shivering in a coarse woolen cloak provided by one of the guards, her iron cuffs rattling with every jolt. She spent the hours bracing for her imminent demise, terrified of the monster waiting at the end of the road. When the fortress of Duncraggan finally pierced the horizon, it looked less like a castle and more like a jagged wound against the pale winter sky. Black stone towers scraped the clouds, and raven banners snapped violently in the gale. The air here felt heavy, crackling with an ancient aggressive magic. The carriage halted in the sprawling courtyard. Garrison Commander Donovan, a man with a jagged scar across his throat and eyes like chipped flint, hauled Alice out. Her legs were numb, and she stumbled her knees, hitting the frozen cobblestones. "On your feet, little bird," Donovan grunted, dragging her upward. "The king does not wait." She wasn't given time to bathe or change out of her soiled, torn linen dress. She was marched directly through the labyrinthine stone corridors of the keep. The northern lords and ladies lined the halls, their eyes gleaming with cruel anticipation. They whispered behind fur-lined sleeves, placing bets on how many days she would survive. "Look at her," sneered Lord Balin, an older aristocratic Lycan with a neatly trimmed silver beard, who Alice later learned was the king's uncle. "Another fragile twig. Valerius will snap her before the sun sets." Donovan shoved open the colossal oak doors to the throne room. The chamber was immense, lit only by roaring braziers that cast violent, dancing shadows against the walls. At the far end of the room sat the Mad King. Alice's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Valerius was massive, easily towering over any warrior in her father's pack. He was bare-chested, despite the freezing draft, his torso crisscrossed with brutal, pale scars. Heavy, enchanted steel chains bound his wrists to the arms of the Iron Throne. His dark hair was wild, hanging over his face, but it was his eyes that stole the breath from Alice's lungs. They were a piercing, luminous amber, but thick, unnatural black veins crawled through the whites of his eyes and crept up the sides of his neck. He was muttering to himself, his chest heaving, as if fighting an invisible war. "My king," Donovan announced cautiously, bowing low. "The tribute from the Ashwood Enclave." Valerius's head snapped up. A low, vibrating growl rumbled from his chest, a sound so purely predatory it made the hair on Alice's arm stand on end. He gripped the chains. The metal groaned in protest. "Ashwood!" Valerius hissed his voice, raspy and layered with the terrifying dual tone of his wolf, fighting for dominance. "They send me. A runt." He lunged forward. The thick iron chain bolted into the floor, violently pulled taut, stopping him inches from Alice. She screamed, throwing her shackled hands up to protect her face, squeezing her eyes shut. She waited for the teeth. She waited for the claws. But the strike never came. Instead, a sudden, deafening silence fell over the throne room. Alice slowly opened her eyes. Valerius was hovering over her, his chest brushing her hands. His nostrils flared as he inhaled her scent. The chaotic, murderous energy radiating from him suddenly stuttered. For the first time in 19 years, a searing, electric shock ripped through Alice's veins. It started in her chest and exploded outward, melting the perpetual cold in her bones. Deep within her mind, something immense and ancient opened its eyes. Her wolf. Valerius blinked. The terrifying black veins creeping up his neck pulsed, then noticeably receded by an inch. The madness in his amber eyes cleared for a fraction of a second, replaced by absolute shock. "You!" he whispered, his voice suddenly agonizingly human. Only she could hear him. "You smell of winter and salvation." He took a step back, breathing heavily, clutching his head as if a spike had been driven through his skull. The black veins began to surge forward again, and the king roared in agony, falling to one knee. "The king is having an episode," Lord Balin shouted from the sidelines, stepping forward with alarming eagerness. "Guards, secure him. Throw the girl in the dungeons before he tears her apart." "No." Valerius bellowed the sheer force of his alpha command, dropping half the guards to their knees. He pointed a trembling clawed finger at Alice. "Take her! To my chambers! Lock the doors!" Alice was violently grabbed by Donovan and dragged away as the king began to thrash against his chains. She was hauled up 2 flights of spiraling stairs and thrown into the king's private bedchamber. The heavy deadbolts locked from the outside. She was trapped. And the sun was setting. Tonight was the full moon. Hours passed in terrified silence. The chamber was opulent, but destroyed tapestries shredded heavy mahogany furniture, smashed to splinters. It was the room of a beast. Alice hid near the grand fireplace, clutching an iron fire poker. Close to midnight, the deadbolts slid open. Valerius was shoved inside by 4 heavily armored guards, who quickly slammed and locked the door behind him. The king collapsed onto the stone floor, his body convulsing. The full moon shone through the massive Gothic windows, bathing him in silver light. Bones cracked and reformed. Muscles tore and shifted. Alice watched in horror as the king transformed into a dire wolf the size of a warhorse. His fur was pitch black, his eyes burning gold. The monstrous wolf locked eyes with her. He barred his massive fangs, saliva dripping from his jaws. He stalked toward her. Alice backed against the stone wall, raising the fire poker with trembling hands. But the beast didn't attack. He stopped a foot away, lowering his massive head to sniff her shoes. He let out a pathetic whining sound, then collapsed onto his side, panting heavily. Alice stood frozen. This wasn't madness. This was agony. She carefully lowered the weapon and stepped closer. Near the king's smashed bedside table, she noticed a silver goblet on its side. A thick, dark sludge had dried at the rim. Alice had spent years working in her pack's apothecaries since she couldn't train as a warrior. She knew her herbs. She knelt down, touching a finger to the sludge and smelling it. Wolf's bane. But not just wolf's bane. It was mixed with crushed silver ash and ground belladonna. It was an incredibly complex, slow-acting poison designed to rot a Lycan's mind and trap their wolf in a state of perpetual agonizing defense. The king wasn't mad. He was being murdered from the inside out poisoned slowly by someone in his own court. Alice looked at the massive, terrifying direwolf lying helpless on the floor. Her father had banished her because she was weak. Her stepmother had sold her to die. But as she knelt beside the poisoned king, laying her small hand on his coarse black fur, her own dormant wolf roared to life, whispering a dangerous promise. She wasn't going to be a sacrifice. She was going to be his cure, and together they were going to slaughter everyone who had wronged them. Morning broke over the jagged peaks of Duncragan, casting pale golden rays through the shattered stained glass of the king's bedchamber. Valerius awoke with a violent gasp. His body was slick with cold sweat, the agonizing memory of his shift tearing through his mind. He squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the coppery stench of blood. Every full moon he blacked out, and every morning he woke to find the horrific remnants of whatever innocent tribute his uncle had locked in the room with him. But this time the air smelled of burning pine, crushed herbs, and something else, a sweet, crisp scent like fresh snow on winter blooms. Valerius snapped his eyes open. He was back in his human form, naked and sprawled on the cold stone floor. Across the room, bathed in the morning light, sat Alice. She was remarkably untouched, kneeling beside the roaring fireplace. She had taken a heavy iron mortar and was grinding chunks of charred wood from the hearth into a fine black powder. You are alive." Valerius rasped his throat raw. He dragged himself backward against the base of his ruined bed, pulling a shredded velvet blanket over his scarred waist. "How the beast! It should have torn you apart." Alice didn't flinch. She approached him slowly, holding a wooden bowl filled with a thick, pitch-black slurry. "The beast is not a monster. My king, the beast is dying." Valerius stared at her, his amber eyes wide with confusion. The thick black veins that normally choked his neck and clouded his vision were throbbing painfully beneath his skin. "What are you talking about?" "You are being poisoned," Alice said, her voice steady, despite the trembling of her hands. She set the bowl down and retrieved the silver goblet she had found the night before. Belladonna. Ground silver ash. Wolfsbane. In real-life apothecary practices, documented in the secret journals of Lady Margaret of the Northern Steppes, this specific combination is known as the widow's kiss. It doesn't kill a lichen outright. It crosses the blood-brain barrier, suffocating the human consciousness while forcing the wolf into a perpetual, agonizing fight for survival. "Your madness isn't a curse. It's an assassination." Valerius stared at the goblet, the realization crashing over him like a physical blow, the missing memories, the blinding headaches, the uncontrollable rage. It was never his wolf going feral. It was his wolf trying to warn him. "Who?" He growled, the walls of the room vibrating with the sheer force of his suppressed alpha aura. "Who benefits from a king deemed too mad to rule, yet kept alive just long enough to maintain the bloodline?" Alice asked sharply. Valerius's jaw clenched. "Lord Balin, my uncle. He oversees the royal kitchens and the guard rotations." He looked at the fragile, fierce girl before him. "Why are you telling me this? Why didn't you let me die? Your pack sent you here to be slaughtered." "Because I know what it is to be discarded by your own blood," Alice whispered, stepping closer. "Drink this." She offered him the bowl of black slurry. "It is crushed charcoal and water. It will bind to the toxins in your stomach and blood. It will be agonizing, but it will purge the poison." Valerius looked at the muddy mixture, then up at Alice. For 3 years he had trusted no one. He had lived in a cage of his own mind. Yet looking into her determined, striking eyes, His wolf let out a deep, rumbling purr of absolute submission. He took the bowl. As his fingers brushed hers, a violent spark of electricity shot through them both. Alice gasped, dropping to her knees as an inferno ignited in her chest. The dormant, suppressed wolf inside her, beaten down by years of emotional abuse, and starvation suddenly ripped through its cage with a triumphant howl. Heat seared across her right collarbone, burning like a branding iron. She cried out, clutching her chest. Valerius dropped the bowl, catching her as she collapsed forward. He pulled her against his chest, his eyes locking onto her shoulder. There, glowing with a brilliant, ethereal silver light, a magnificent mate mark was carving itself into her pale skin. It was the crest of the Iron Ridge King, a wolf intertwined with a crown. "By the goddess!" Valerius breathed his amber eyes, clearing completely the black veins, instantly retreating from the sheer healing power of the mate bond. "You are not a sacrifice. You are my queen." He kissed her, and for Alice, the world shattered and rebuilt itself in an instant. The humiliation of the Ashwood enclave, the coldness of her father, the sneers of her sister, it all washed away, replaced by the overwhelming, intoxicating strength of the Mad King's love. She wasn't hollow. Her wolf had simply refused to answer to anyone but the most powerful alpha on the continent. Over the next 3 days, Alice and Valerius worked in the shadows. They remained locked in his chambers, ordering the guards to leave food at the door, under the guise that the king was too volatile to be seen. Inside, Alice aggressively detoxified him. She used willow bark for his fever-smuggled milk thistle to cleanse his liver and bound the remaining silver with charcoal. With every hour, Valerius grew stronger. The hunched, raving lunatic vanished, replaced by a terrifyingly sharp, brilliant military tactician. Together, they mapped out the conspirators. They realized Lord Balin had been paying Garrison Commander Donovan to turn a blind eye and using the royal cupbearer Thomas to slip the poison into Valerius's evening wine. Balin's plan was to legally declare Valerius unfit at the upcoming winter solstice court, forcing the crown onto his own head as regent. "He thinks I am broken," Valerius said on the 3rd night, standing by the window in a pair of dark leather trousers, his muscular back straight and unblemished. He turned to Alice, who was draped in his heavy fur cloak, looking like a true monarch. "Let him think it. When he reaches for the crown, we will cut off his hand." Alice smiled, her eyes flashing with a dangerous, predatory gold. "And when he falls, I want to invite my family to the funeral." The Great Hall of Duncragan was a masterpiece of medieval architecture, adorned with heavy velvet banners and roaring hearths. On the night of the winter solstice, the entire northern court was gathered. The lords and ladies whispered nervously, their breath pluming in the draughty hall. At the center of the dais stood Lord Balin, dressed in opulent robes of crimson and gold. Beside him stood Garrison Commander Donovan, hand resting casually on the pommel of his broadsword. "My lords, ladies, and alphas of the north," Balin announced, his voice echoing with rehearsed sorrow. "We gather tonight in the shadow of tragedy. For 3 years we have watched our beloved King Valerius descend into madness. He slaughters his tributes. He destroys his chambers. He is a rabid dog lost to the beast." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "The bloodline is tainted." Balin continued, stepping up to the empty iron throne. "For the safety of the realm, the law dictates that a king who cannot master his wolf must be stripped of his title. I, as his closest blood relative, must bear the heavy burden of the regency. I have ordered the king to be heavily sedated and confined to the lower dungeons for his own safety." Balin reached out his fingers, brushing the cold iron armrest of the throne. Long live the Reg. I suggest you step away from my chair, uncle, before I tear out your throat and feed it to the ravens." The heavy oak doors of the great hall shattered open with an explosive crack. The entire court spun around, gasping in collective horror. Standing in the doorway was King Valerius. He was not in chains. He was not raving. He was clad in magnificent, terrifying armor of blackened steel and gold. His eyes were a piercing, crystal-clear amber. He radiated an aura of dominance so suffocatingly powerful that several lesser lords immediately fell to their knees, their inner wolves submitting instinctively to their true alpha. And on his arm was Alice. She was no longer the shivering, mateless runt in a soiled linen dress. She wore a breathtaking gown of midnight blue velvet lined with silver fox fur. Her hair was braided with diamonds, and a delicate silver circlet rested on her brow. But it was the confident, lethal grace of her movements that stunned the crowd. She carried herself not like a survivor, but like a predator. At her collarbone, proudly displayed for the entire court to see, was the glowing, unmistakable mate mark of the king. "Guards!" Balin shrieked, his face draining of all color. "He is mad. He has broken his restraints. Kill him!" Commander Donovan drew his sword and lunged forward, followed by a dozen corrupt guardsmen. But Valerius didn't even draw a weapon. He simply released a roar, a concussive, earth-shattering wave of pure alpha command. The sound physically hit the charging guards, forcing them to drop their weapons and collapse, clutching their bleeding ears. Valerius stalked down the center aisle, Alice flawlessly matching his stride. Loyalists in the crowd, seeing their king completely restored to his legendary glory, drew their own swords, instantly surrounding Balin's terrified men. "You poisoned my cup," Valerius said, his voice a deadly quiet rumble as he ascended the dais. Balin backed away, trembling violently. "You corrupted my guards. You tried to trap my wolf in the dark. But you made one fatal miscalculation, uncle." Valerius reached out, gripping Balin by the throat and lifting the grown man off the floor with a single hand. "You sent me my cure." With a sickening crunch, Valerius shattered his uncle's collarbone, tossing him down the steps of the dais like a discarded rag doll. "Throw this traitor and his conspirators in the cells," Valerius commanded the loyal guards. "Let them see how long they survive the madness." The court erupted into cheers as Balin and Donovan were dragged screaming from the hall. Valerius turned, extending his hand to Alice. She took it, ascending the final steps to stand before the throne. "Kneel before your queen," Valerius bellowed, as hundreds of proud northern warriors and nobles dropped to their knees, bowing their heads to the girl they had once placed bets on dying. But Alice's revenge was not yet complete. 2 weeks later, heavy wagons rolled into the courtyard of Duncragan. Alpha Corin, Lady Vivian, and Gwendolen stepped out into the freezing snow, their eyes wide with greed. They had received a royal summons bearing the seal of the king, demanding their presence at the capital. They assumed Alice was dead, and the king wished to offer them more riches for their sacrifice. They were escorted into the great hall, which was now warm and brilliantly lit. Corin puffed out his chest, stepping forward to address the throne. "My king," Corin began, bowing smoothly, "we of the Ashwood Enclave are honored to answer your summons. We hope the tribute we provided served your needs." "She served my needs perfectly," Corin, a smooth, feminine voice, answered. Corin froze. That wasn't the king's voice. He looked up, squinting against the bright torchlight. Sitting comfortably on a smaller, beautifully crafted silver throne next to the king was a young woman. She wore a crown of winter diamonds, her posture relaxed, sipping dark wine from a silver goblet. Lady Vivian gasped, clutching her chest. Gwendolen took a terrified step backward. Alice! Corin whispered, all the blood draining from his face. That is Queen Alice to you, Alpha. Valerius growled, his eyes flashing dangerously as he leaned forward. But you had no wolf. Corin stammered, his mind unable to comprehend the sight before him. You were blank. You were useless. I was waiting, Alice corrected softly, standing up. She walked down the steps of the dais, stopping mere inches from her father. She let her aura slip just a fraction. The sheer, overwhelming power of a fully awakened royal Lycan hit Corin like a battering ram. He choked, his knees buckling under the instinctual urge to submit to his pack's new apex predator. You sold your own blood for grain and silver, Alice said, her voice echoing in the silent hall. You stripped me of my name. You chained me like an animal. You believed I was a broken link in your chain. But I am not the broken link, Father. I am the iron that shatters it. Alice turned to the royal guards. Strip Alpha Corin of his title. The Ashwood Enclave will now be governed directly by the Crown, overseen by a regent of my choosing. Confiscate their lands, their wealth, and their status. You cannot do this, Lady Vivian shrieked, falling to the floor. We are your family. Alice looked down at her stepmother with eyes as cold as the northern glaciers. My family is the king. You are just a rogue I caught trespassing in my territory. Escort them to the borders. If they ever cross into our lands again, hunt them. Corin and his family were dragged away, sobbing and begging, banished to the very wilderness they had threatened to throw Alice into. Alice watched them go, feeling a profound, absolute peace settle over her soul. She turned back to the dais. Valerius was watching her, his amber eyes filled with raw, unbridled devotion. He held out his hand. Alice took it, stepping up to the Iron Throne, no longer a banished outcast, but the most feared and beloved queen the North had ever known. And that is how a discarded outcast flipped the script to become the most powerful queen in history. Do you think Alice was too harsh on her family, or did they get exactly what they deserved? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with your friends for more epic romance and revenge tales.